Greetings, this is rsmalec, and I'm going to be talking to you about the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. In fact, the Ultimate Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy collection by Douglas Adams. Now in Chapter 4, we let the Earth being destroyed sink in a little bit and take you across the galaxy, the universe, somewhere else. We meet Zaphod Beeblebrox. He is the president of the Imperial Galactic Government. The interesting note here is that, as I said in the beginning, I've never read this series before, but I had heard of the name Zaphod Beeblebrox, and I had always thought he was the main character of this series. Clearly he's not the main character. He's a very strong supporting character. He is working on something called the Heart of Gold project at a planet called Damogran. He is on his second year of a 10-year presidency, and interestingly enough, there's a footnote here. Now, there aren't many footnotes in this book, and I don't know if these are unique to the collection or if these are in the original book, but basically the government is headed by an emperor who's been in stasis for a very long time, so he's basically always going to be the emperor, and the president gets elected not to wield power, but to draw attention away from the true power of the universe that only a small group of beings actually truly understand. To date, I don't think it's actually been explicitly explained. So Zaphod Beeblebrox is nearing his 200th birthday. We find out that he has a third bionic arm, and that he is an adventurer and potentially a crook as well. I think the coolest thing that stood out in this chapter is that of all the different sentient species who are with him working on this Heart of Gold project, there is something called a hullabaloo, and a hullabaloo is a super intelligent shade of the color blue. So not anything like an alien that we would see in a Star Trek or a Star Wars series. Is literally a color that is sentient. The president, or Zaphod, wears an orange sash around his neck, which also made me think of Doctor Who, wearing the scarf around his neck. And we see that 3 billion people are watching him as he is in front of the camera with his two heads. It made me wonder why it was only 3 billion. I would think in the universe it would have been a much, much larger number than that. Perhaps at the time this was written, a population of 3 billion was expected to be very large, but obviously the Earth alone, well, I guess the Earthlings wouldn't obviously have been watching him, but there's only 3 billion other viewers in the galactic government at this point that we're watching. We find that in the crowd is someone named Trillian, and this is Zaphod Beeblebrox's girlfriend, basically, more or less. And they're all expecting him to make a speech, and he comes out with these one-liners like, hi, okay. So he's not giving the crowd exactly what they want. The other folks behind the scenes realize this and unveil the project. The Heart of Gold is actually some sort of a spaceship. Now, Beeblebrox has a trick up his sleeve, and he basically paralyzes the entire crowd with some sort of a bomb. And at this point I'm thinking, did he also paralyze his girlfriend? I wasn't sure. But he basically runs forward with intent to steal the ship. In Chapter 5 we take another slight detour, this time to understand the Vogon history. The Vogons are an alien species that at some point in their early development just stopped evolving. We also find out that Ford Prefect might not know his real name. This was in another footnote that talked a little bit about his backstory. And we then get to the point where Ford Prefect and Arthur Dent are on the Vogon ship. They were beamed up via a matter transference beam just before the Earth was destroyed. And Ford Prefect actually has developed a number of theories about humans over the years. His second theory, which was disposed of but I thought was very interesting, is if they don't keep on exercising their lips, their brains will start working. So basically he's saying that our brains are not working to their fullest potential because we talk too much. We find out that the thumb drive that I referred to in Chapter 1 is actually what he uses for hitchhiking, which makes sense. I did not catch on to that at first, but it's basically used to give a thumbs up to passing ships and signal them to come pick him up and give him a ride. The Heart of Gold is said that it will make hyperspatial express routes unnecessary. What that means is it will travel so fast that they don't need to make a interstellar highway through the spot where the Earth used to be, therefore the Earth was destroyed for nothing. And Ford Prefect tells Arthur Dent to put a fish in his ear. Arthur Dent struggles because this is just so outlandish. His planet's been destroyed, he's totally out of it, and the fish gets slithered into his ear from Ford. And I really like this quote where it says, "He was experiencing the oral equivalent of looking at a picture of two black silhouetted faces and suddenly realizing that it is a picture of a candlestick." I can't imagine a better sensory image on paper to describe exactly what it sounded like through a visual image. In Chapter 6, we find out that the Vogon captain wants to throw the hitchhikers off the ship, and then they're going to do a 72-hour retrofit after jumping through hyperspace. Now, this part made me question, well, 72 hours by which calendar? Earth calendar? And then I thought, well, actually, maybe he said something like, some number of hours in his language, but the babblefish in Arthur Dent's ear translated it into an Earth equivalent, 72 hours. I don't know why I spent so much time thinking about that particular passage, but I did. And right after that, it basically says that the babblefish has caused more and bloodier wars than anything else in the history of creation, which is a funny irony because obviously a lot of wars start because of misunderstandings between people, and so the babblefish actually allowing people to understand each other has caused even worse wars. When asked what Ford Prefect wrote about the Earth in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy, which I probably should mention, although I'm sure you know it at this point, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is just that. It is a guide to people hitchhiking around the universe. The original entry that Ford Prefect wrote for Earth was simply the word harmless. Arthur Dent took a little bit of exception to that, and then Ford basically explained, don't worry, the editor, changed what I wrote and put mostly harmless. Chapter 7, there's a rather gory discussion of poetry, and Ford and Arthur are to be thrown out of the ship. Ford tries to do a logic trap on a guard who's marching them to the airlock, and it doesn't quite work, but while they're in the airlock, now remember I said that Ford Prefect doesn't understand sarcasm, but at one point they're basically unable to come up with a plan of how to escape, and Ford goes, "Wait, what's this switch?" And then Arthur's like, "What? Where?" And then Ford's like, "No, I was only fooling." At that point, they're both popped out into space. And I just thought that interchange was really weird because I don't know what you would call that other than sarcasm. He was just basically goofing around. Chapter 8's another short one. The Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is basically like a wiki with many contributing authors, and we find out that a human can survive in space only about 30 seconds on a lung full of air, and it was 29 seconds before they were rescued. Chapter 9, Ford and Arthur are going through some kind of universal black hole. They're in what I would call crazy space, where things are just completely random, and they basically find out that they are inside the Heart of Gold. In Chapter 10, we find out that the Heart of Gold is powered by an infinite improbability drive.